It is not your fault that you are still exhausted. Society has sold you a beautiful, paralyzing lie about what it actually means to heal. They told you that if you just process your trauma, practice mindfulness, and forgive those who broke you, the pain will magically vanish. But if you are still suffering, it is not because you haven't forgiven enough. It is because you are absolutely terrified of the monster you must become in order to finally protect yourself. Feel the crushing weight of your current reality. If we do not shatter this illusion of passive healing right now, I know exactly what your tomorrow looks like. You will wake up, swallow your completely justified anger, draft another polite response to a toxic email, and take on the burdens of people who do not care about you. This self-inflicted cycle of emotional depletion will not end on its own. You are bleeding out while politely asking the predator to hand you a bandage. There is another way out, but it requires stepping into the dark. By applying Carl Jung's profound concept of shadow integration, we are going to perform an act of psychological alchemy. We will not use his philosophy to make you a villain, but to forge the necessary psychological fangs you need to survive. We are going to transmute your agonizing emotional pain into the cold, calculated power required to finally stop the bleeding and command absolute respect. The air in the therapist's waiting room feels heavy. The deafening tick of the wall clock echoes in your chest. You sit there, perfectly reciting all the culturally approved psychological buzzwords. You talk about setting boundaries, self-care routines, and practicing mindfulness. Yet, beneath this polished vocabulary, your hands are shaking, and your stomach is tied in a sickening knot. You are doing everything right, but the anxiety remains stubbornly anchored in your bones. This is the exact moment a terrifying realization hits you. Intellectually understanding your trauma has done absolutely nothing to actually stop the abuse. Modern psychology has inadvertently trapped you in the illusion of the enlightened victim. You have been taught that merely naming your wounds is the same as resolving them. You have become an absolute expert in articulating your own suffering, analyzing every childhood trigger, yet you somehow remain the perfect prey. In the language of analytical psychology, Carl Jung would diagnose this state as a dangerous inflation of the persona. You have over-identified with the socially acceptable archetype of the noble, healed sufferer. You wear this mask so tightly that you have completely repressed the raw, natural aggression required for basic self-defense. You have convinced yourself that anger is toxic, when in reality, your suppressed rage is the only immune system your psyche has left. Your endless capacity for forgiveness and your compulsive need to intellectualize betrayal are not signs of elevated spiritual maturity. They are an unconscious control strategy. By endlessly analyzing the motives of the emotional predators in your life, you are trying to create a fleeting illusion of safety in a chaotic world. You are using empathy as a desperate shield to avoid confronting the terrifying, visceral necessity of engaging in actual psychological conflict. You analyze the manipulator because it feels significantly safer than standing up and declaring war. But this intellectual armor is slowly suffocating your life force, turning your noble intentions into a psychological prison. You must look in the mirror and ask yourself a deeply uncomfortable question. What if your desperate, exhaustive attempt to heal is actually an elaborate, unconscious strategy to avoid fighting back? This desperate avoidance of conflict doesn't just happen on the therapist's couch. It plays out in the grim reality of a corporate parking lot. Liam sits in his car, staring blankly at the steering wheel. He has just agreed to work yet another weekend while his charismatic, manipulative manager goes golfing. A physical sickness rises in his gut, a toxic, heavy mix of absolute exhaustion and quiet self-hatred. He grips the wheel and tells himself he is simply being professional. But let's dissect this professionalism. Liam believes that by carrying the weight of the entire department, he is proving his indispensable value. He thinks his endless accommodation will eventually earn him respect. This brings us to a terrifying question, but cuts straight to the core of your own experience. Why does your endless accommodation not lead to gratitude, but instead guarantee your eventual destruction? We are conditioned to believe that predators target the strong to tear them down. This is a comforting myth that flatters the victim. The clinical truth is far more brutal. The predator does not exploit you because you are strong. They exploit you because they sense a fractured ego. They can smell a psyche that desperately needs external validation, even from an abuser, just to justify its own existence. Liam is not a victim of circumstance. He is actively buying his survival with his own dignity. But the human psyche operates on strict, uncompromising laws of compensation. Carl Jung called this fundamental mechanism enantiodromia, the inevitable, violent emergence of the unconscious opposite. When you force your persona into extreme, unnatural compliance on the outside, you guarantee the creation of an equally extreme, toxic resentment on the inside. Liam is literally poisoning himself to keep the peace. Every time he forces a smile and accepts an unfair demand, he compresses a spring of repressed rage. This suppressed energy doesn't just disappear, it turns inward. It manifests as chronic insomnia, unexplained anxiety, and a grinding resentment that slowly eats away at his psychological foundation. He is burning his own house down just to keep his manager warm. To stop this self-immolation, we must completely redefine what it means to be a good person. True compassion is not a spineless surrender to anyone who demands your time. It requires a formidable, impenetrable boundary. It requires an I that can clearly and aggressively differentiate from the other. When you merge with the demands of the manipulator, you are not keeping the peace. You are actively participating in your own psychological erasure. You cannot save a relationship or a career by simply ceasing to exist as an individual. When Liam absorbs his manager's incompetence, he is teaching the predator that his boundaries are imaginary. This transactional nature of the nice guy complex is the ultimate trap. You trade your authenticity for a temporary reprieve from conflict, only to wake up 10 years later realizing you have entirely lost yourself. We leave Liam's silent corporate surrender and step into a completely different kind of psychological prison. It is 2 a.m. inside a quiet, overpriced studio apartment. The only illumination is the cold blue light of a smartphone screen reflecting off Emma's exhausted face. She is meticulously reading a 3-page, heavily gaslighting email from her ex-partner, dissecting every single sentence to figure out where she went wrong. She is drafting her 4th response, painfully calibrating her tone so she sounds entirely reasonable and unbothered. She tells herself she's just trying to find closure. But look closer at this exhausting forensic analysis of a lie. We must pause and ask a deeply unsettling question about this behavior. What if you secretly need to relentlessly understand the monster because you are absolutely terrified of becoming one yourself? Emma is trapped in a devastating cycle we call the paralysis of analysis. She is actively using her formidable intellect to bypass the screaming alarm bells of her own gut instinct. By obsessively focusing on his motives, his childhood trauma, and his hidden wounds, she creates a brilliant smokescreen. This intellectualization is a highly sophisticated, unconscious defense mechanism designed to avoid the responsibility of absolute rejection. As long as you are trying to figure them out, you do not actually have to pack your bags and walk out the door. You do not have to face the agonizing grief of a shattered illusion. You remain safely engaged in a puzzle that has no solution. You convince yourself that if you can just explain your boundaries perfectly, the abuser will finally grant you the validation you crave. But you cannot decode a predator. You can only starve them. This brings us to one of the most brutal truths in all of Jungian psychology. You do not attract these specific manipulators by accident. The unconscious mind acts like a relentless magnet, inevitably pulling you toward the exact archetype required to force your own repressed material to the surface. The manipulator in your life is not just a random tragedy. They are a perfectly calibrated mirror reflecting your own profound imbalances. The emotional vampire who exploits without a shred of guilt represents the exact opposite of Emma's hyper-accommodating persona. They reflect her own completely denied capacity for ruthlessness. Because she has repressed her natural aggression, her inner monster, she is forced to experience it externally through her abuser. Just like Emma, you are bleeding out because you refuse to integrate your own psychological teeth. By constantly buffering the manipulator's toxic actions through the noble lens of understanding their trauma, your empathy transforms into a weapon against yourself. You become an infinite shock absorber for someone else's dysfunction. This relentless focus on fixing the external other becomes the very mechanism that completely halts your own process of individuation. You cannot build your authentic self while acting as an emotional landfill. If this exhausted reality mirrors your own life, if you recognize the sickening trap of overanalyzing the people who repeatedly hurt you, hit the like button right now. It tells us we are uncovering the right wounds. Share in the comments how many nights you have lost trying to decode a manipulator's lies. And to make sure you do not miss the next step, where we finally forge the weapons to cut these ties, subscribe to the channel. The intellectualizing must stop. We have to leave the safety of the mind and enter the visceral reality of conflict. Picture Liam, finally standing in his manager's office, the air thick with expectation. Or imagine Emma holding her phone, her thumb hovering nervously over the block button. In both scenarios, their hearts are racing, and their socially conditioned minds are screaming at them to apologize, to smooth things over, to explain themselves one more time. They are facing the terrifying silence of a deliberately withheld emotional response. This heart-pounding moment is the precipice of true psychological change. It forces you to confront the ultimate paradox of your own liberation. Are you prepared to become the villain in their story in order to become the sovereign of your own? Society has trained you to dread this exact feeling, to view being the bad guy as a catastrophic moral failure. But in the ruthless arena of the psyche, accepting the role of the villain is the only way out. The moment you stop providing that emotional buffer, the manipulator does not suddenly gain self-awareness. Instead, they experience a profound narcissistic injury, a violent shattering of their ego's reality. To protect themselves from this collapse, they will instantly weaponize projection. They will look you dead in the eye and accuse you of the exact toxicity they embody. This is the ultimate test of your resolve. If you flinch now, If you try to defend your reputation, you lose everything. To survive this ferocious projection, you cannot rely on your polite, accommodating persona. You must consciously integrate the shadow. This means reaching down and deliberately accessing the repressed, culturally unacceptable parts of your own psyche. You must learn to weaponize your anger, embrace your inherent selfishness, and most importantly, unleash your capacity for cold, absolute indifference. This is the essence of psychological alchemy, transmuting the heavy lead of your ongoing suffering into the refined gold of cold calculation. By doing this, you are not becoming evil. You are simply weaponizing your pain into a fierce immune response against a deadly infection. Cold indifference is the impenetrable armor that stops their projected shame from ever entering your mind. But understand this undeniable truth. Withdrawing your endless empathy will physically hurt. Jung explicitly noted that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. As you stand your ground and hold the line of silence, it will feel exactly like crushing, unbearable guilt. Do not run from this agonizing sensation. It is a trick of your lifelong social conditioning. That agonizing guilt is not a signal that you are doing something wrong. It is merely the growing pain of your emerging self. You are finally breaking the invisible psychological chains that have drained you for years. The manipulator will thrash, they will scream, and they will demand that you play your familiar part. Let them. Your sovereignty is worth infinitely more than their temporary comfort. We take this newly integrated shadow, this cold calculation, straight back into the fire. Liam is standing in his manager's office. The familiar, unspoken demand for weekend work hangs in the air. Instead of smiling, instead of offering a frantic list of polite excuses, Liam simply looks his boss in the eye and states, "I will not be available this weekend." He stops talking. He holds the silence. He allows the profound discomfort to fill the room. Across town, Emma hits the block button. She drops the phone into her bag and walks out into the cool night air. The apocalyptic fallout her conditioned mind had promised her does not happen. The sky does not fall. Back in the office, the manager blinks, stammers, and awkwardly retreats. This sudden shift forces us to confront a vital paradox. Why does true respect only appear the exact moment you finally bare your teeth? Here is the unvarnished truth about human dynamics. A boundary without a consequence is nothing more than a suggestion. You can politely explain your feelings to a manipulator 1,000 times, and they will ignore you. The integrated shadow provides the psychological teeth necessary to enforce the border of your identity. It transforms your no from a request into a solid, impenetrable wall that the predator suddenly realizes they cannot cross. By saying no and refusing to explain themselves, Liam and Emma have executed a masterstroke of psychological liberation. They have completely collapsed their false personas. They are no longer the nice guy or the understanding girlfriend. They have become fiercely, unapologetically authentic. And authenticity is fundamentally impenetrable to manipulation, because there is no longer a gap between what they feel and what they project. However, do not mistake this initial retreat for permanent surrender. When you establish this new, fortified boundary, the manipulator will inevitably test it. In behavioral psychology, this is known as an extinction burst, a desperate escalation of chaos, anger, or sudden affection designed entirely to force you back into submission. They will try to make you doubt your own sanity. They will try to make you feel like the abuser. This is the final crucible. Your only task during this extinction burst is to remain absolutely grounded in your newly forged self. You must stand still and simply observe their frantic, thrashing tactics with cold, detached calculation. You do not explain, you do not apologize, and you absolutely do not intervene to manage their emotions. You watch the storm, secure behind the armor of your integrated shadow, knowing that their panic is the proof of your newfound power. The storm eventually passes. You wake up to a clear, quiet morning. You are sitting alone at your kitchen table with a cup of coffee. The phone is entirely silent. The inbox is completely clear. For the first time in years, that crushing, familiar tension in your shoulders is entirely gone. The energy coursing through your body finally belongs to you and no one else. You are finally breathing your own air. Liam and Emma were just mirrors. This is your reality now. You have spent your entire adult life believing that endless giving was your highest moral duty, but you have finally recognized the trap. Your empathy is not an infinite resource. It is a finite, sacred currency. And it is time to permanently stop subsidizing the spiritually bankrupt. You no longer have to carry the heavy, chaotic burdens of people who are absolutely committed to their own destruction. You have chosen to save yourself. Stepping into this new life means abandoning the desperate need for external approval. A person gains true psychological power only when they accept that being perfectly understood by everyone is a complete fool's errand. When you stop twisting yourself into knots to appease a predator, they will inevitably call you cruel or selfish. Sovereignty requires the absolute courage to be disliked. Let them misunderstand you. Their disappointment is simply the price of your freedom. This is the profound beauty of Carl Jung's alchemical process. The dark side you spent so many years trying to suppress is the very thing that saved you. Your newly integrated shadow is not a monster to be feared or locked away in the basement of your psyche. It is the ruthless, necessary guardian standing at the gate of your individuation. When you allow yourself to be dangerous, you cease to be prey. You become a grounded individual who cannot be devoured. Let the emotional parasites starve in the cold, harsh reality of their own making. Your vital life force is meant for your own ascent, not to serve as a perpetual life support system for those who refuse to heal themselves. If you are finally ready to claim this sovereign power, I want you to declare it right now. Write this exactly in the comments to physically anchor your new boundary into reality. I am the ruthless guardian of my own energy. The illusion of the endlessly accommodating savior is dead. You have survived the agonizing fire of integration, and what emerges is a completely untouchable mind. Step out into this quiet morning and guard your sacred currency with absolute resolve. You owe this chaotic world nothing but your authentic self. You made it out of the dark labyrinth. You are alive. And that is enough. Until next time.